He brushed the dirt off his hands and looked at the grave of his only son, Simon. He had died at 12 from an aggressive form of cancer for which there was still no cure. He was, or rather, had been, their only child. They had talked more than once about having another, but his wife had rejected the idea. Simon had been dead for 2 years now, and Bradley still loved to visit his grave to talk to his son. After Simon's death, his relationship with his wife never improved. Bradley wanted them to go to counseling, but her? She'd been so against it that he'd given up on the idea. And now? Bradley felt like he knew the truth. He knew why his wife had never wanted another child and why she had rejected counseling, and he realized that the problems were much deeper and older than he had realized. Bradley listened to the tape of the party and felt cold, even though it was the height of summer. He knew things were bad between him and Jill. She had been weird for years, but in the last 6 months or so, she had gotten even weirder. She started criticizing him, finding faults in him, and deliberately starting fights over nothing. Eventually, she sat him down at the kitchen table and paced the room as if she felt worked up. Her mood was strange, but she seemed much calmer than she had been lately. "What's wrong, Jill? You've got something on your mind." She turned to face him. "Bradley, you and I haven't gotten along for a long time, and I think it's time for a trial separation." He felt his stomach burn with acid. "When are you leaving?" She looked shocked. "Oh, honey, I thought it was time for you to leave. It's not like I'm going to ask for a divorce or anything. And I promise you on our son's grave and on your life that there's no one else before you ask that question. I just need some time to figure some things out." Bradley wasn't stupid. He was hurt that she'd used their son's grave to swear on what was likely a lie, and the fact that she'd chosen to swear on his life and not her own. He thought that was important. Not that he felt he particularly valued his life at the moment. "So," Bradley said, "perhaps you should seek couples counseling to help us find a way out of this situation." She shook her head. "You know my opinion on counseling, but I'm not saying no to therapy for us, but what I am saying is that it has to be in the future. Not now. I don't feel like I'm ready for it at the moment, but I'm certainly not ruling it out." He looked at her. "When do you want me to leave?" "Well, not right away, of course." A look of pain appeared on his face. "I'll get out of your way as soon as I can. I'll arrange everything as quickly as I can." She breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Are you going out to work today?" He shook his head. "Not today, are you?" "Yes, I have a meeting at Advanced Synergies that will probably take all day." He nodded. "Good. How are you going to tell people we're splitting up?" "We're not going to split up. It's just a temporary separation." She was angered by his answer. She continued, calming down a bit. "You don't need to tell anyone about it yet, if you should at all." He shrugged. She couldn't read the expression on his face. It was a pity, because at that moment she could still have saved the situation, but she hadn't. She didn't want to anyway. After that, she went to work. Bradley knew he had plenty of time to take care of some business. Bradley was not a man to mess with. He'd been in the military police and had been on a number of highly classified undercover assignments taking down drug gangs on army bases, so he had a lot of experience in covert surveillance. In fact, he did the same thing in civilian life, working for the city police department after serving 10 years in the Army at age 29. He had several VARs and motion-sensitive miniature video cameras that he could place around the house. Each had a terabyte memory card, so months of footage could be recorded if needed. When he finished the job, he packed a couple suitcases and checked into a motel. When Jill got home, she was outraged that Bradley had already left. "Son of a bitch!" she shouted. "He's gone!" Her friend, Mandy Starbuck, was with her. "Aren't you being a little harsh, Jill? After all, you're the one who asked him to move out, or are you the kind of woman who is never satisfied with her husband?" She laughed at her own joke, which was just as well, since Jill didn't see the humor in it. "Anyway," Mandy said, "now that he's gone, why don't we move our girls' night out up a few weeks?" "Yes," Jill said. "Now that I'm rid of Bradley, things could be very different." That hurt Bradley's feelings, but he was wise enough not to report it to Jill. After all, he had to face mob assassins and bluff. So dealing with a cheating spouse must be child's play, he thought. But was she really cheating? He would soon find out. Everything came to a head after Bradley heard a recording of a so-called girls' night out at the house. Wine poured down by the river, and as the old saying goes, when you drink, your mind wanders. The party was attended by Jill, Mandy, and a few other grunting and clucking women. Bradley learned that Jill had been cheating on him for the past 5 years, with several lovers, and one of her lovers was a very wealthy businessman from South America. He had arranged for Jill to fly on his private jet nonstop to Rio. The women mocked Bradley, but it was Jill who got the worst of it. And he had no idea about any of my lovers. They laughed and cackled like witches. Bradley listened to the rest of the tape in utter despair. There was nothing he could do. Wait a minute. Yes, he could. It would make him out of reach of Jill and her lovers. He visited Simon's grave. Don't worry, son. I'll be with you soon. We'll be together again. He knew Jill would be at work, so he was able to stop by the garage of their house, he no longer considered it home, and pick up everything he needed. Bradley drove his car to a secluded semi-rural spot on the outskirts of town, away from the road. Sobbing at what he was doing, Bradley put a long piece of rubber tubing from the exhaust pipe into the car. He turned on the engine and let it idle while the deadly carbon monoxide fumes did their work. Bradley's last words were, "I'm sorry, Simon. I'm so sorry, my boy. But this way we can be together forever, just like I promised." The note Bradley sent to everyone in his and Jill's email inboxes was short and succinct. You took an oath on Simon's grave and on my life that you wouldn't cheat. But you cheated, and I'm honoring your vow. Goodbye, Jill. I loved you, Bradley. After the funeral, many of Jill's friends dropped her like hotcakes. After all, cheating on her husband is bad enough, but hurting him so badly that he thought suicide was the only way out? And the mothers in her group of friends were very concerned about the fact that she had taken a solemn vow on her son's grave, even though it was a brazen lie. Jill decided to accept her lover's proposal and traveled with him to South America. After the first phone call upon her arrival in Rio, Mandy had not heard from her, though she promised to keep in touch. But life for the English meritress in Rio is as shitty and brutal as you'd expect. But a white American woman? Some rich South American men willing to pay a lot for her services. The payback was a bitch.